Hi. Okay, let's set this up. Okay. Oh. Okay. We try again. There we go. Okay. Welcome back to part 4 of The Alchemist. I just want to say, first of all, it's 6 o'clock, which is the time I've been reading this. 6 o'clock Pacific time. But breaking news right now is that Justice Ruth Ginsburg just passed away. And so it feels a little bit like that is the most pressing thing at the moment. So I just want to give a nod to that and say I will be reading, but just to say let's all be aware and let's vote, and God bless our country and God bless the rest of this year. Okay, so part 4 of bedtime books, read aloud. We're going to do just like the other days. We're going to do like 20 minutes and see where we go. See where we get to. Okay. So the where we left off was Santiago had decided to follow his personal legend and try to go to the pyramids in Egypt and find the buried treasure. And he'd sold all of his sheep and bought passage to Tangier. And there he got swindled out of all of his money. So now he's alone in the city where everyone speaks Arabic, and he has no money and no sheep. And the only thing he has is the Urim and Thummim that the King Melchizedek gave him, and he's planning on selling those so that he can get passage back to Spain and start over there. That's where we left off. Okay. Now Santiago understood why the owner of the bar had been so upset. He was trying to tell him not to trust that man. I'm like everyone else. I see the world in terms of what I would like to see happen, not what actually does. He ran his fingers slowly over the stones, sensing their temperature and feeling their surfaces. They were his treasure. Just handling them made him feel better. They reminded him of the old man. When you want something, all the universe conspires to help you achieve it, he had said. The boy was trying to understand the truth of what the old man had said. There he was in the empty marketplace without a cent to his name and with not a sheep to guard through the night. But the stones were proof that he had met with a king who knew the boy's past. They're called the Urim and Thummim, and they can help you read the omens, the man had said. The boy put the stones back in the pouch and decided to do an experiment. The old man had said to ask very clear questions, and to do that, the boy had to know what he wanted. So he asked if the old man's blessing was still with him. He took out the stone, and it was yes. Oh, so the way he told him to use the stones was that the black stone means yes and the white stone means no. So I guess he put the stones back in the bag and he asked a question and then pulls out a stone. Okay. So he asked if the old man's blessing was still with him, and the stone said yes. Am I going to find my treasure? He asked. He stuck his hand into the pouch and felt around for one of the stones. As he did so, both of them pushed through a hole in the pouch and fell to the ground. The boy had never noticed that there was a hole in the pouch. He knelt down to find Urim and Thummim and put them back in the pouch. But as he saw them lying there on the ground, another phrase came to his mind. Learn to recognize omens and follow them, the old king had said. An omen. The boy smiled to himself. He picked up the 2 stones and put them back in the pouch. He didn't consider mending the hole. The stones could fall through at any time they wanted. He had learned that there were certain things one shouldn't ask about, so as not to flee from one's own personal legend. I promised that I would make my own decisions, he said to himself. But the stones had told him that the old man was still with him, and that made him feel more confident. He looked around at the empty plaza again, feeling less desperate than before. This wasn't a strange place, but it was a new one. After all, what he had always wanted was just that, to know new places. Even if he never got to the pyramids, he'd already traveled further than any shepherd he knew. Oh, if they only knew how different things are, just 2 hours by ship from where they are, he thought. Although his new world at this moment was just an empty marketplace, he'd already seen it when it was teeming with life, and he would never forget. He remembered the sword. It hurt him a bit to think about it, but he'd never seen one like it before. As he mused about these things, he realized that he had to choose between thinking of himself as the poor victim of a thief and as an adventurer in quest of treasure. I am an adventurer in quest for my treasure, he said to himself. He was shaken into wakefulness by someone. He'd fallen asleep in the middle of the marketplace, and life in the plaza had begun to resume. Looking around, he sought his sheep, then realized he was in a new world. But instead of being saddened, he was happy. He no longer had to seek out food and water for sheep. He could go in search of his treasure instead. He had not 1 cent in his pocket, but he had faith. He had decided the night before that he would be as much an adventurer as the ones he had admired in his books. He walked slowly through the market. The merchants were assembling their stalls, and the boy helped a candy seller do his. The candy seller had a smile on his face. He was happy, aware of what his life was about, and ready to begin his day's work. His smile reminded the boy of the old man, the mysterious old king he'd met. This candy merchant isn't making candy so he can travel later or marry a shopkeeper's daughter. He's doing it because it's what he really wants to do, thought the boy. He realized that he could do the same thing the old man had done, sense whether a person was near or far from his personal legend, just by looking at them. It's easy, yet I've never done it before, he thought to himself. When the stall was assembled, the candy seller offered the boy the first sweet he'd made of the day. The boy thanked him, ate it, and went on his way. When he'd gone only a short distance, he realized that while they were erecting the stall, one of them had spoken Arabic and the other Spanish. And they had understood each other perfectly well. There must be a language that doesn't depend on words, the boy thought. I've already had that experience with my sheep. Now it's happening with people. I totally get that, by the way. There were times when I was in Japan where I would speak English and the other person would speak Japanese, and we would get along swimmingly. And it wasn't a magical, like, I understand your Japanese and you understand my English, but like, you get the heart of what they're trying to say. And it was great. Okay. He was learning a lot of new things. Some of them were things that he'd already experienced and weren't really new, but that he had never perceived before. And he hadn't perceived them because he had become accustomed to them. He realized, if I can understand this language without words, I can learn to understand the world. I can learn to understand the whole world. Relaxed and unhurried, he resolved that he would walk through the narrow streets of Tangier. Only in that way would he be able to read the omens. He knew it would require a lot of patience, but shepherds know all about patience. Once again, he saw that in the strange land, he was applying the same lessons he had learned with his sheep. All things are one, the old man had said. The crystal merchant awoke with the day and felt the same anxiety he felt every morning. He had been in the same place for 30 years, a shop at the top of a hilly street where few customers passed. Now it was too late to change anything. The only thing he had ever learned to do was buy and sell crystal glassware. There had been a time when many people knew of his shop. Arab merchants, French and English geologists, German soldiers who were always well-heeled. In those days, it had been wonderful to be selling crystal, and he had thought how he would become rich and have beautiful women at his side as he grew older. But as time had passed, Tangier had changed. The nearby city of Quetta had grown faster than Tangier, and business had fallen off. Neighbors moved away, and there remained only a few small shops on the hill. No one was going to climb the hill just to browse through a few small shops. But the crystal merchant had no choice. He'd lived 30 years of his life buying and selling crystal pieces, and now it was too late to do anything else. He spent the entire morning observing the infrequent comings and goings in the street. He had done this for years and knew the schedule of everyone who passed. But just before lunchtime, a boy stopped in the front of the shop. He was dressed normally, but the practiced eyes of the crystal merchant could see that the boy had no money to spend. Nevertheless, the merchant decided to delay his lunch for a few minutes until the boy moved on. A card hanging in the doorway announced that several languages were spoken in this shop. The boy saw a man appear behind the counter. "I can clean up those glasses in the window if you want," said the boy. "The way they look now, nobody's going to want to buy them." The man looked at him without responding. "In exchange, you could give me something to eat." The man still said nothing, and the boy sensed that he was going to have to make a decision. In his pouch, he had his jacket. He certainly wasn't going to need it in the desert. Taking the jacket out, he began cleaning the glasses. Oh, so the boy had a decision to make. So the boy just starts cleaning the glasses. In half an hour, he had cleaned all the glasses in the window, and as he was doing so, 2 customers had entered the shop and bought some crystal. When he had completed the cleaning, he asked the man for something to eat. "Let's go have lunch," said the crystal merchant. Here's a little picture. He put a sign on the door and went to a small cafe nearby. And as they sat down at the only table in the place, the crystal merchant laughed. "You didn't have to do any cleaning," he said. The Quran. Sorry, not the Korean, the Quran. The Quran requires me to feed a hungry person anyway." "Well, then why did you let me do it?" the boy asked. "Because the crystal was dirty. And both you and I needed to cleanse our minds of negative thoughts." When they had eaten, the merchant turned to the boy and said, "I'd like you to work in my shop. 2 customers came in today while you were working, and that's a good omen." "People talk a lot about omens," thought the shepherd, "but they really don't know what they're saying. Just as I hadn't realized for so many years that I'd been speaking a language without words to my sheep." "Do you want to go to work for me?" the merchant asked. "Well, I can work the rest of the day," the boy answered. "I'll work all night until dawn, and I'll clean every piece of crystal in your shop. In return, I need money to get to Egypt tomorrow." The merchant laughed. "Even if you cleaned all the crystal for an entire year, even if you earned a good commission selling every piece, you would still have to borrow money to get to Egypt. There are thousands of kilometers of desert between here and there." There was a moment of silence so profound that it seemed the city was asleep. No sound from the bazaars, no argument among the merchants, no men climbing the towers to chant. No hope, no adventure, no kings or personal legends, no treasure, and no pyramids. It was as if the world had fallen silent because the boy's soul had as well. He sat there staring blankly through the door of the cafe, wishing he'd died and that everything would end forever in that moment. The merchant looked anxiously at the boy. All the joy he had seen that morning had seemed to suddenly disappear. I can give you the money you need to get back to your country, my son, said the crystal merchant. The boy said nothing. He got up, adjusted his clothing, and picked up his pouch. I will work for you, he said. And after another long silence, he added, I need money to buy some sheep. Death of a vision. We're at the end of the part, and we're up to part 2. Let's not leave it there, shall we? Let's go on a little bit. Obviously, he's not going to give up and go back. But that's how he feels at that moment. Like, it's impossible. Part 2. The boy had been working for the crystal merchant for almost a month, and he could see that it wasn't exactly the kind of job that would make him happy. The merchant spent the entire day mumbling behind the counter, telling the boy to be careful with the pieces and not break anything. But he stayed with the job because the merchant, although he was an old grouch, treated him fairly. The boy received a good commission for each piece he sold, and he'd already been able to put some money aside. That morning, he had done some calculating. If he continued to work every day as he had been, he would need a whole year to be able to buy some sheep. That's funny because the merchant said it would take a year for him to be able to have, like, not enough money to go to Egypt. But, like, I mean, it's the same basic principle. Maybe he could borrow the rest. I'd like to build a display case for the crystal, said the boy to the merchant. We could place it outside and attract those people who pass at the bottom of the hill. I've never had one before, the merchant answered. People will pass by and bump into it, and the pieces will be broken. Well, when I took my sheep through the field, some of them might have died if we'd come upon a snake, but that's the way life is with sheep and shepherds. Gotta spend money to make money. He didn't say that. I added that. The merchant turned to a customer who wanted 3 crystal glasses. He was selling better than ever, as if time had turned back to the old days when the street had been one of Tangier's main attractions. Business has really improved, he said to the boy after the customer had left. I'm doing much better, and soon you'll be able to return to your sheep. Why ask more out of life? Because we have to respond to omens, said the boy, almost without meaning to, and then regretted what he'd said, because the merchant had never met the king. It's called the principle of favorability, beginner's luck, because life wants you to achieve your personal legend, the king had told him. But the merchant understood what the boy had said. The boy's very presence in the shop was an omen. And as time passed and money was pouring into the cash drawer, he had no regrets about having hired the boy. The boy was being paid more money than he deserved because the merchant, thinking that sales wouldn't amount to much, had offered the boy a high commission rate. He had assumed that the boy would soon return to his sheep. Why did you want to get to the pyramids anyway? He asked, to get away from the business of the display case. Because I've always heard about them, the boy answered, saying nothing about his dream. The treasure was now nothing but a painful memory, and he tried to avoid thinking about it. By the way, guys, I've never read this before, and so I'm like reading it fresh, and the intonations and the inflections in the sentences, I'm only noticing, like, in hindsight, what is really meant to be conveyed, so I apologize for that. I'm figuring it out as I go too. Anyway, so the boy is like, because I've always heard of them, the boy answered, saying nothing about his dream. The treasure was now nothing but a painful memory, and he tried to avoid thinking about it. I don't know anyone around here who would want to cross the desert just to see the pyramids, said the merchant. They're just a pile of stones. You can build one in your backyard. You've never had a dream of travel? Said the boy, turning to wait on a customer who had entered the shop. 2 days later, the merchant spoke to the boy about the display case. "I don't much like change," he said. "You and I aren't like Hassan, that rich merchant. If he makes a buying mistake, it doesn't affect him much, but we two have to live with our mistakes." "That's true enough," the boy thought ruefully. "But why did you think we should have the display?" "I want to get back to my sheep faster. We have to take advantage when luck is on our side and do as much to help it as it's doing to help us. It's called the principle of favorability. It's beginner's luck." The merchant was silent for a few moments. Then he said, "The Prophet gave us the Quran and left us just 5 obligations to satisfy during our lives. The most important one is to believe only in the one true God. The others are to pray 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan, and be charitable to the poor." He stopped there. His eyes filled with tears as he spoke of the Prophet. He was a devout man, and even with all his impatience, he wanted to live his life in accordance with Muslim law. "What's the 5th obligation?" the boy asked. 2 days ago, you asked if I'd ever dreamed of travel," the merchant answered. "The 5th obligation is every Muslim must take a pilgrimage. We are obliged at least once in our lives to visit the holy city of Mecca. Mecca is a lot farther away than the pyramids. When I was young, all I wanted to do was put together enough money to start this shop. I thought that someday I'd be rich and I could go to Mecca. I began to make some money, but I could never bring myself to leave someone in charge of the shop. The crystals are delicate things. At the same time, people were passing my shop all the time headed for Mecca. Some of them were rich pilgrims, traveling in caravans with servants and camels, but most of the people making the pilgrimage were poorer than I. All who went there were happy at having done so. They placed the symbols of the pilgrimage on the doors of their houses. One of them, a cobbler who made his living mending boots, said he had traveled for almost a year through the desert, but that he got more tired when he had to walk through the streets of Tangier buying his leather." "Well, why don't you go to Mecca now?" asked the boy. "Because it's the thought of Mecca that keeps me alive. That's what helps me face these days that are all the same, these mute crystals on the shelves, and lunch and dinner at that same horrible cafe. I'm afraid that if my dream is realized, I'll have no reason to go on living. You dream about your sheep and the pyramids, but you're different from me because you want to realize your dreams. I just want to dream about Mecca. I've already imagined 1,000 times crossing the desert, arriving at the plaza of the sacred stone, the 7 times I walk around it before allowing myself to touch it. I've already imagined the people who would be at my side and those in front of me and the conversations and the prayers we would share. But I'm afraid it would all be a disappointment. I prefer to just dream about it." That day, the merchant gave the boy permission to build the display case. Not everyone can see his dreams come true in the same way. Wow. I wonder if the suggestion is that the merchant, the crystal merchant, is missing out on having his dream fulfilled because he's holding back, or if the implication is that he's fulfilling his dream his way by having it be a thought, an ideal that he's looking towards rather than trying to make a material reality. I don't know. Hey, Matt. We're reading The Alchemist. 2 more months passed, and the shelf brought many customers into the crystal shop. The boy estimated that if he worked for 6 more months, he could return to Spain and buy 60 sheep and yet another 60. In less than a year, he would have doubled his flock, and he would be able to do business with Arabs because he was now able to speak their strange language. Wow, impressive. Since that morning in the marketplace, he had never again made use of the Urim and Thummim, because Egypt was now just as distant a dream for him as Mecca was for the merchant. Anyway, the boy had become happy in his work and thought all the time about the day when he would disembark at Tarifa as a winner. Is it still going? My phone alarm went off. Anyway, let's pull it there. Let's call it there. Hey, Tyler. Sorry, I was just wrapping up. So basically, he's doing well in the crystal shop. He's sort of given up on the treasure in the pyramids in Egypt. And he's looking forward to going back to his old life in Spain, only with the funds to double his flock. And he would consider himself a winner. So there we go. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you want me to keep doing these. I think I'm going to take a break for the weekend and then maybe pick up again, same time, same place, next Monday. Have a great weekend.